Down to the lecture room downstairs for the close. So I'll get started. Thanks, Reg. So welcome everyone. My name is Reg de Silva. Just a quick background about me. This is my 9th year of Agile, doing various roles from Agile DA, Scrum Master, Agile Project Manager, and Agile Coaching. For various companies, the usual suspects, Census, worked at IOOF, ANZ, doing Agile, and that's where I cut my teeth. And more recently at Telstra, and I'm about to start a new government gig next week, coaching Agile there as well. We've got the last session for the day, so I know everyone's probably been absorbing a lot of information today. So this one I'm going to try and keep nice and visual, and very rudimentary thinking. So, I'm going to try to avoid bombarding you with heaps of theory. So if I start going down that path, by all means, flag me and say, you're making me think too hard, because that's not my aim today. Okay, so today, there's a lot of things I can talk about with Agile, and this is one I think is not spoken about enough, and it's really talking about transparency, having visibility, and visualization is a classic term that we associate with Agile. And I've used the American spelling with a Z, just because if you Google that, you'll get much better results than if you use an S. So you'll have to excuse my American English in that particular word. So I'm going to get straight into this and just really want to get a really good understanding, a basic understanding about what these things mean. What I've got is a subtitle here, which is what to do when you don't know anything. And there are two key contexts that I want to talk about there. One is, if I'm experienced with Agile and I enter a project at the start and I don't know anything about the project, how do I mobilize myself? What are some of the models I can use to do that? And then there's the other context I want to talk about, and that is, if I don't know anything about Agile, what are the things I can do immediately when I walk into an environment that is adopting Agile that can add value straight away without me having to understand or be experienced with all those classic accepted models. And those are the two things I want you to think about. So first of all, I'm going to talk about what we mean by transparency, visibility, and visualization. Because if you look up visualization, you'll see a few different interpretations and philosophies behind that. The classic one is, if I really want to achieve something and I visualize that, that's going to help me to achieve it. We're not really going to talk about that too much in an Agile context. When we talk about visualization in an Agile context, the classic thing that comes to mind is a Kanban Board, which really helps us to visualize our work and our flow and helps us to manage that to get stuff completed. So that's really one key thing. You'll see there'll be a lot of pictures of walls because I really do want to address that focus. But what I want to talk about is the things that can help you succeed with your project is understanding all of the factors that are going on around you that are competing with the stuff that you are there to deliver. Especially if you're told, here are all your stories, get them through, and that's how I'm going to judge your success. But yet you've got all these background tasks, you've got to interface with architects, you've got to get all these heavy documentations in a large corporate done, and those things, you don't want them sitting on cards on your wall blocking all your other stuff that you can do really quickly, but you do want to address those. So you need to make them visible. And that's really what I want to talk about here, is getting all those other things that are bubbling in the background that you have to deal with, but may not be dealing with as quickly, but still have to get done. So how do you do that? Stick it up on a wall. We talk about this term, big visual charts. Now, what should that look like? It should look like whatever you think is going to be useful for you to capture that information and deal and deliver it. So one of the things I also want to talk about is, why do we want to visualize stuff, right? Is it to measure what we've delivered and what we've done? And I think this is one of the biggest misconceptions, especially when you've got to deal with a lot of project managers. They go, show me a record of how you're traveling. And so I'm like, okay, well, looking at the past isn't really going to help us unless we're using that knowledge to help us for the future. What we want to do is we want to be able to see what's happening at the present so that we've got different ways, different feedback loops that help us manage all of that stuff. So the present is more important than the past to us, because the past is done and dusted. It doesn't really matter how you got there. The fact that you have got there, in my opinion, is what counts. The thing about visualization, transparency, visibility, is to help us deal with the most ambiguous thing, and that is the future. So the things that are really hard, and we all know this, all of us that have been involved in estimation, it's really hard because you're trying to estimate what's going to happen in the future, and you don't have a lot of information until you hit that point. And the thing is, you generally suck at it when you first do it. But what you do is you learn and you get better, and you get better very quickly if you've got some nice feedback loops in place. So the thing is, what we say, and I think the manifesto, the Agile manifesto, where it says responding to change over following the plan, a lot of people, they're not reading the whole sentence and saying, well, planning is important. Just the actual plan, big Gantt chart that says on this date at this hour I'm going to deliver this is just rubbish. But what we say, especially in an Agile world, is planning is so important. And it's planning that is more important than the plan itself. But don't not plan, because it's a corny term, but if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And you'll see time and time again, everyone just says, nah, just start the work. And then what you do is you spin your wheels, you burn cash, you stop, you regroup, you do your planning, and then you start. And how much money do you burn? Right, on average, 50 to 100,000 a week, right? Pretty big cost. I wouldn't mind getting that as a bonus, right? So when we look at transparency, visibility, visualization, it's really to help us plan the future, plan work in progress, because with Kanban, the hardest thing to do is to measure work in progress. And it's why, if we work on Agile, we say there's no partial credit for stuff that is 90% complete, because what does 90% complete mean? Right? If something is not delivered and we can't get value out of it, it doesn't count for anything. So what we want to do is we want to deal with that ambiguity, and helping us to do that are things like visual models. So what I want to talk about is some of the informal and ad hoc models that you might use. So I don't know how interactive people are feeling, but does anyone have any thoughts around some of the models they use that aren't necessarily your classically adopted Agile models when they're actually doing projects? And this is usually shown on your B walls and your project rooms or your project pods. Are there any models that you guys are using that you'd like to share with us? Mark? How about you?
Just the standard ones for me, really.
Yeah, your usual story card walls.
Story card wall and the burn up is probably the two things that I like to use.
Okay. So you're not doing anything, you're not doing leave calendars?
We do have leave calendars online.
Yeah.
And that's about the size of it, really. Keep it
Right.
pretty simple.
Okay.
So something that we've been experimenting with is, I don't know how many of you guys have seen like the little range comics with the smiley faces, the frowny faces, getting a whole bunch of those and just putting them up on the wall so people have, if they're feeling a particular way about a card, if they're scared by it, if they think it's risky, if they're happy, if it's just pissing them right off, they can actually just stick a little smiley on the card. So you can walk past the wall and just see like a wall of smiley faces, like, okay, cool. They all know people care about that particular thing. Just get an emotional sort of a sense for how the team is feeling about the work at the time. It's kind of an interesting barometer. I don't know if it'll last, but it's...
Yeah, and that's a great model, and it's used in a lot of different contexts. You do it specific to a card that you're playing. Some people just do it on a day-to-day basis. Might have each team member and do a temperature check of how motivated they're feeling. So that straight away tells you as a team leader whether you have a problem, and whether you, especially where you've seen a string of common patterns where people are demotivated, and that might help you focus on things like retrospectives, what you want to focus on, things like that. What I was told in my last project when I started was, I was just trying to gather all the information to get the work started, and I was told, you've got to put something on a wall. And I said, okay, but we've got nothing to put on a wall, right? I said, I don't know, and I said, do you want me to basically make this project look agile? And that was the essence of it, because the whole, where I was working, all of IT is going to do agile or die trying. And I thought, well, if I'm going to put something up on the wall, I want to make it valuable for me and for people around me to get useful information. So the first thing I did was actually created just a calendar timeline with little sticky notes of all the key events that I was planning to do for the release. So where my iteration cadence was. So what dates each iteration started and stopped, and then each of the activities that occurred within those iterations. Then I suppose the project managers and said, okay, from a governance point of view, what are the things that we have to deliver for deployment? So I put those things on. And then straight away I had a visible space that actually had valuable information. Now, once I actually started the project and we started sprint 0, iteration 0, and iteration 1, I tore that wall down because we now had all that information in a better spot. But regardless, at this day one, we were able to get useful information up on the wall. Leave calendars became one of the most useful things, and we put avatars with little symbols for which days people were away for leave. And what I actually did was I colour-coded those stickers so that all the technical resources were blue colour, the BAs were yellow, project managers were red. So straight away when you looked at the leave calendar, you saw these little coloured stickers, you knew straight away if you had a low capacity of technical resourcing over a period of time. So there are those things. What you want to do is you want to look at something and straight away have information absorbed without having to think or have someone explain it to you. And this is what you see time and time again. You see a lot of walls that are just sticky notes and sticky notes sitting on top of sticky notes. And you look at it and you think, to me that's failed as a feedback mechanism because I just can't get it by simply going up to it and looking at it. So one thing when you do your walls, follow your Kaizen of keeping things clean and neat and sustain that behaviour. And start doing that because it's very hard to adopt that behaviour if you start fairly loose and liberal in how you allow people to do their visual space. So some of the other things that I've done is, had to do, doing and done. Didn't really estimate these tasks. Just had the tasks we had to complete in order to deploy into production. Deployment readiness reviews or disaster recovery plans, all those sorts of things might go on there so that you can actually track and manage them. And do that separate to your story wall. Risk issues and hot topics, and you might put actions up as well. Make those things visible if that's useful for you to do. So all these models, they're not rocket science, they're just simple things that you have to achieve. But sticking them somewhere visible means it's likely to get more attention. There's an infinite number of models you can put up on the wall, but do what makes sense for you, and only do what's relevant. Don't just do something because it's something that you should do because you're agile. Because do something because it's something you must do to actually deliver outcomes. And that's really the main message is, I don't want to get too religious. I'll get a little bit more religious later when we talk about some of the other models, which might be pretty soon. All right, so models, examples, informal and ad hoc. I've left this intentionally blank because this was more to get your thoughts about what models you might value so that we can get wisdom of the crowd. But I think it's late in the day, so I might just move on to some of the more formal models that I've used. So there's a few photos, and I've taken these from friends. I've surfed the net for some of the things, so just be prepared that not everything is going to be majorly polished, but at least it's a dose of reality, which is always interesting. Okay, so I've cherry-picked a few models, and what I'll do, whoever wants to, can give me their email after this session. I'll send you a little pack that has links to where I find some of the best resources, and I'll give you some of the stuff that I've made that haven't error tested properly, so things like Agile reports. You'll see them later. If you like them, email me and I'll give you a copy of it, and you're more than welcome to use them, don't to worry about copyright. So the elevator pitch, this is if you're doing business visioning, but if the business knows what they want when they come to you, this may not be so important. So the whole concept of the elevator pitch is if I'm the CEO on an elevator ride and I'm to explain what my project is achieving, the elevator pitch gives me that. And you might iterate through this a few times to get it, sounding pretty sweet. So that's one model, and you might put an elevator picture there if you want to make it pretty visual. This is, as a BA, I love doing this when I didn't understand what the scope of my project was. Simple, in, out, question mark. So really just a list of stuff that is in scope, and it's also important to capture the stuff that is not in scope, because you don't want to be spending time doing that, burning cash, money, and effort. And unresolved is, and could be, but I'll leave that up to you. And unresolved is that stuff that people can't make a decision on. You capture it, and at least you've got a placeholder for a discussion later on. Okay, trade-off sliders. So there's a lean concept called measure up, which is I ultimately want to have one measure of success that defines whether I get hired or fired. And they say, even here, right, we've got 5 measures, and that's 4 too many according to Lean principles, because what you really want is you want one. But what we say with your trade-off sliders is, okay, usually you do your classic project drivers of scope, time, budget, and quality. And you might have additional things such as user experience based on the project. But what you should never do is have 2 sliders that are exactly the same, you know, because then you're deadlocked if you ever need to make a decision. So always, like, anyone that I'm soliciting to do this, I say to them, you cannot have equal sliders, tell me what's the most important thing. And usually, as soon as you see something that is the most on, so stay within budget, you know above everything else, that is what you have to deliver to, and you will be successful if you deliver that. So this is a really simple model that can, and stick it up on a wall, because that also shows agreement from all parties and stakeholders on your project. And if people want to change it, no problem. Certainly do that. So domain models, I'll quickly talk about this. I won't get into this in great detail because everybody, well, a lot of people will do different styles of domain modeling. A business domain model will focus on your actors, your business drivers. Technical domain model, you know, you might have data models, ER diagrams, a whole bunch of them. But the useful thing about a domain model is it just models the stuff in your system. And especially where you've got conflicting terminology. Classic one is when I was working in mortgages, we were doing workflow and we had brokers. And a broker is just an automated process. But a mortgage broker is somebody who represents the business. So we've got these 2 terms, broker, to both used in the mortgage context. So what you do is you change the workflow broker to be called robot, right? Straight away. And you put that in your domain model. So often a domain model is really good if it's supported with a glossary. You know, simple, here is the term, and here is our agreed definition. Not the definition I've got out of a dictionary, necessarily, unless that's the one you want to use.
Good question.
Yeah.
Who's your audience for these? Like, who actually reads these?
So this is all, if you're doing behaviour-driven development, this really helps you to get what they call ubiquitous language, which is a language that everybody's speaking that's the same. It means the same business speak the same language. The testers, the developers, the business analysts, project managers all speak the same.
And all those people actually look at a diagram like this and get something out of it?
If this is going to be of value to you, right? Whereas you've got a very simple domain, it might be very intuitive to understand that. But quite often, especially where you want to have, if you're doing Cucumber, where you want to have an agreed language, a domain model really supports that nicely. But I usually do very crude domain models, just, you know, boxes and lines. I don't really put in heaps of detail.
Yeah, because these are often fun to draw. I just wonder
and you know, they're very transient,
yeah.
right? So it's not something you're going to laminate and stick on a wall. You might stick it on a wall, but it's likely to change.
You bring it to a meeting or two, you sort out your disagreement, you can't move on.
Yeah. But it's more that, you know, if everybody kind of gets this in their mind and does that, then it really supports you doing, you know, your domain-driven design. But the thing is, the domain model itself is very theoretical. Having a glossary to support it, and then evolving that into your actual language like Cucumber is really useful. So that's just another model. And once again, I'll cherry-pick these things. It might not be useful for you. Don't use it. If it's just, you know, something that's going to, people go, oh yeah, you did your job, but it didn't actually add value. So as a BA, and especially getting to a point where you've got your stories, doing an as-is to-be model. Now this one's, you know, don't worry about the detail, it just kind of shows you processes and decision points. And even this, to me, is a bit too complex. I generally don't do swim lanes. I just put a model up and lines and boxes, and that's enough. That's better than nothing. And it really at least gives you an understanding at a high level of your processes, and you can drill those down. These are really useful, especially if you want to get to the point where you've got your stories. Because a lot of these boxes will translate directly to an epic or a story, and then you can decompose those. And even a decision point might be a story, or it might at least provide information for different stories.
I've actually seen process modeling like that kick off some really interesting discussion as well, where business representatives suddenly realise that they actually have quite different ideas of what goes on in some of those processes. Can be good clarification exercise as well.
You're absolutely right. As a straw man, to say, this is my view of the world, like people love to tell you what's wrong about it.
Yeah.
Right? So having something like that in front of people is useful.
I've also seen, just at a very small level, business realise that they don't know what their processes are.
Yeah, you're spot on, you're spot on.
And it becomes a driver for them, their discovery,
Yeah.
before you can actually go.
Yeah. But you're right, you know, and this draws out all those things, the visibility, the transparency, and you know, oh, maybe we don't really know our processes, you know. And how do we expect IT to?
Or there's three different viewpoints about what the processes are
You're
in
spot
the
on.
same business unit.
Yeah, I know, and even that conflict and discussion is invaluable, especially in stopping all the pain of having to build something, tear it down, and build something else that's correct. So yeah, all this stuff, you know, the earlier you do it, the cheaper it is to change, and that's why, you know, these models become, you know, quite simple to do, but absolutely brilliant in terms of cost and effectiveness. So prototypes and mock-ups, you know, if you're in a very UX heavy or user experience heavy domain, then these things are really good. This is a tool called Balsamic that a lot of you might be familiar with. The thing I love about this is everything looks hand-drawn. So those are actual controls within the program that make everything look hand-drawn, because then it doesn't look like a complete product. Because often you show prototypes to the business and they go, well, what do you need to do? The product's complete. All right? And we know that the cost of changing UI can be quite high. So when you've got a nice kind of look, it looks a little bit dirty like this, it's great. So I just thought I'd bring that up.
Just on prototypes in PowerPoint or on written bits of paper.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to prove that this isn't a working system, but how does it look so far?
Yeah, exactly. You know, don't make it look polished.
You can actually get, I've seen this done actually several years ago as a .NET project, but where as they were doing incremental development, and they actually, initially the UI did look like that.
Yeah.
Right, their widgets were actually sketchy. If the button wasn't done yet, if it was still in progress, it looked sketchy, and then it became a proper button once it was done and ready for people to use. Just as a sort of means of communication.
Yeah. So once again, you know, you don't have to do this for everything, but you know, decide what's going to be useful for you. Low fidelity prototyping like this, medium fidelity, which is something that looks real, and then high fidelity, which has actually got your real HTML in it. But once again, do what suits your environment the best. If you've got gun developers that knock stuff up really quickly, maybe high fidelity prototyping is the way to go for you. But in a lot of cases, just get your concepts right, do things that look a little bit less finished.
I think that we found the risk of a high fidelity prototype is snug.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, look, it does what I like. Like we did that with an iPad app, and they're like, right, so we released it in 2 weeks. Like, dude, this is a picture. Have you noticed everything's the same? Oh, so you just got to fix that. Like, no.
I know, it kills you. It absolutely is. Stitches you and the team up.
Yeah.
You know, it's you know, unless you've got a really brilliant trusted relationship with the business, yeah, try to avoid it if you can. I guess it is a problem when you've got iPad apps and stuff. Yeah. You know, you're kind of doing that sort of spiral prototyping.
Joel Spolsky has a really good blog post on this. I think he calls it the iceberg problem, being that the UI is like the tip of the iceberg, but most stakeholders don't realise. So he suggests doing things like, you know, if you've got 2 features and each of them is reachable via a button on the front page, we make one of the buttons here look nice and have, you know, like look finished, and the other button, if the feature behind it's not finished, for God's sake, make the button look unfinished, and make text around it look crappy, so people realise that the thing's only half done.
Yeah. And the good thing is, you know, this forms your skeleton, so you can stick this up on the wall where you're very UI driven. But you're right, it is the tip of the iceberg, and you know, you've got to scream to people, there's an iceberg. So yes. All right, so I'll move on to personas, and this is kind of leading into another topic we'll talk about in a sec. So this is really, and there is debate over personas. So personas is your classic users of your system. Try to profile them and work out what their drivers are. Now, there's debate over, should this be a fictitious person or should this be a real person? Have a think about your users, because if you're building for a very neurotic, specific user, you might find it hard to hire similar people to run that system. But it's all about knowing what are the things that are going to kill you in perception of success. Because if the users don't regard something as meeting their needs, you could have delivered your project brilliantly, met all your drivers, and then everyone's going, this project sucked, and these guys didn't deliver what I wanted. And understanding your users really helps with that. But once again, it doesn't apply for every project in every situation, but if it does for yours, doing something like a quick persona of people certainly helps you get context to what your users will ultimately need to do, and might help you start helping them through that change earlier. So personas is quite a useful model to use. And you stick these people up on the wall, it really humanises your projects as well. Okay, so story mapping. What we talked about is we talked about process mapping, and we talked about personas, and they're two key things that will help you doing story mapping. And I believe we've already had probably a great presentation about story mapping, so I'm not going to really talk about this too much. One thing I like about story mapping compared to having my normal backlog is my normal backlog, as soon as the product owner or whoever reprioritizes it, I lose sight of what the big picture looks like. The story map kind of maps out your process and also talks about key points within that and puts it on a wall in a logical flow. And you can point to that and go, okay, this is what we're delivering in terms of your features and what that actually looks like in a big picture sense. So story mapping is really good. Jeff Patton is the guy to look at for this stuff, because I've stolen one of his pictures here where he says, often a story map can run a whole wall. And what I'm going to do is just escape out of this presentation, so to forgive me, just so that I can scroll across here and show you actually how long this story map that he's got is. Alright, so he's got, so it goes, let me use this little arrow. Right, so, oops. So it goes across all the way along. Yeah, so obviously these guys love their story maps because they've put quite a lot of work into, and this has probably been refined, but yeah, it's pretty epic. So, don't be afraid to use your whole room or corridor. Alright, so I just wanted to highlight story maps because, that's, I really like what I see with story mapping. Definition of done is something you probably hear about. What does it look like? How does it look? Here we've got, I usually just do them at a story level. I get the guys to do it at a story level, what each of my swim lanes defines, entry and exit criteria. Here we've talked about definition done for tasks, definition done for stories, definition done for the sprint, and definition done for the release. If that's useful for you, by all means, do that, because then there's no argument. People go, this story is done here. No, it's not. You go, well, let's look at our definition of done. And I've done this several times with my team, where we've had argument about whether something's done. We look at our definition of done. Everyone goes, okay, based on that, it's done or it's not done. So it's really handy. And what I did was, I'll show you some of the walls that we had for the PMs and the BAs. I got them to each write up their definition of done. So we had several walls, and each wall we created a definition of done for all of those.
Just out of curiosity, how much of any pushback do you get typically on that lovely second bullet point there on the story, tasks include bugs? Because my best experiences have been in environments where when you introduce a defect, you fix it before adding new functionality, right? Yeah. And I've also found that to be a very hard sell to places that have never done it. Like, it couldn't possibly work. It has for me in the past, personally. Yeah. But, yeah, you...
Yeah, so what I did with my team, I sat down with the test lead, or whoever's going to manage the testing process, and I said, okay, when we have a defect, let's talk about what our process is. Because do we move that back into the backlog for the product owner to make a decision on whether we deal with that defect or not? Or do we take a default position, like you've done, where defects suddenly become the most important thing for us to do? And usually technical guys love that approach. Defects, we've got to kill them, we've got to get them.
And root cause as well, if you have a defect, usually it traces back to a systemic or an architecture problem.
Yeah, exactly. So we were running Kanban at the time, so we had an express lane, and we said, okay, our default position is, unless it's an edge case that is low risk, it goes straight into the express lane and gets allocated to the developer who's best assigned to it, and they stop what they're doing and they fix that and push it through. So that's the approach we took, but you've got to first work out your defect management process, come up with a few suggestions, and then once you agree to that, that's it. And then inspect and adapt. So if it actually sucks, change it later.
Sure.
Yeah, but that's the approach I take. Ultimately, don't care how you do it, as long as we've got a method for dealing with it that isn't going to put the project at risk. So yeah, there's a few ways. And the approach you take is a very, very normal one. Okay, so I'm going to bring up some walls. So I'm going to bore, if you don't like walls, you're going to be in for a bit of boredom because I've taken some photos. The one on the left is my buddy Reese gave me that photo. This one is my interpretation of Mike Cohn's Scrum task board. As you can see, mine was a little bit petite. I don't like losing windows. You know, we've got views, water. You know, a lot of people stick their cars up on windows. So it's just me. I just think it's so rare to get a window view in an office. It's a pity to ruin it. But do whatever you feel you should do. Make it your own is one of the things. So here, this is when we first started the project. I put these tech tasks up just to do doing data, no estimates on them. And this is where I allowed multiple avatars. I'll talk about avatars later. We had the tech backlog. We were doing a very technical piece of work. And then I had this ongoing tasks, which was a percentage of overhead. And our tech lead was dealing with his manager, and it was 50% of his time. And I said, let's make it visible. So then we can have a conversation about why she's chewing up so much of his time. Then the PM sort of bit left out, and they said, Reg, can you give us a wall? I said, yeah, I'll work something out. So I put something up, and then they refined it. So these are all the work requests that come in, and this is, and they've got, we had different sections for each PM, and my section was the Agile section. And that went through done. They loved that. They took really good ownership of it. And then the BAs felt a bit left out. So we came up with this BA wall. And so their workflow was a bit different, ready for analysis, in analysis complete, in review complete and done. So one thing I'm not going to talk about today is electronic tools, but we were using Jira and Rally later on to reflect this stuff electronically. The BA in Sydney, the lead BA, created her own physical wall there as well to match this one. Okay, so some other walls we have here. This one is, once again, the guys from Greece.
Yeah. Should they all be using the one wall space where everyone can see what everyone else is doing? If I'm working with a BA, why should they be sort of separated in a different area? Because then that just breaks the whole team.
Yeah, that's really valid. I think if your workflow is the same, you should do that. Keep it in one spot. And a lot of people, you know, will say, don't mix up your walls. For me, if the nature of the work is similar, absolutely keep it in one spot.
We have different color codes for post-its, so we know, okay, this is what BA is doing. So.
Yeah, and that's why I say make it your own. And that's why I showed you mine. I separated the work a bit. Pros and cons to doing that. So you're right, you know, try to keep it together if you can, because it just localizes everything nicely. As you can see, this is the Scrum task board that Reese are using. They keep all their stuff together, as you suggested, which is quite good. So a few more photos from those guys. This is at Seek, my buddy at Seek. So I just want to show you some of the different wall examples from those guys. This one's very much an ideas wall. So once again, make it your own. This is my Kanban system that I had. And I sent a photo to one of my friends, and she said that my cars look like they were written by peasants. So she goes, why are you printing them? So then we decided to work on that. So we did a mail merge out of Rally CSV into Word and printed all our cards. And just looks, you know, you can't really see the detail. It looks nice and clean. This is moving to the Scrum task board. So really, to do this, you need your team operating in a task mode. So with tasks. So get that first. Otherwise, this format's going to be a bit useless for you. The importance of avatars. I really want to highlight this because avatars, you know, this is taken from the South Park avatar created. I'm not really dressed appropriately for my avatar, but avatars are not just a novel thing. They're such an important thing. I only give my team one avatar when I'm working on a storyboard. But if I'm doing background tasks, I'll have multiples. Because quite often those are stop-start things. But I'm very dogmatic about trying to only give people one avatar because then
What
they
do you
don't.
mean by that? Only having one avatar, you mean they can only work on one task at once?
The whole thing is to stop the multitasking. Because theory constraints is that you're only as fast as the slowest thing you process. So you deliver two things equally slowly if you work on two things. Work on one thing, that thing gets delivered faster, than the second thing that is equally as slow as it would have been.
Does that work for everyone?
At least you have the conversation if they want to do multiple things, right? So it's sometimes I go, I'm going to do this and this. I said, well, look, don't worry about constantly updating your avatar and getting up from your seat. Just put it on your primary task, and if you're working on multiple things, work out your system, but try to avoid people doing multiple things is what I'm saying there. But avatars are so key, especially if you just want to glance into someone. They're brilliant. So
sorry, can I just make one observation on that? Those South Park avatars drive me nuts. Because we were using them when I came to the team I'm on now at LP, and it's like, right, I think that's Kenny working on that. I don't know who the hell that is. So we went from those South Park avatars to photos, and that has been absolutely awesome.
Yeah, and look, I print in bold people's names underneath. Because I agree, the South Park avatars are good because they're easy to whip up, but a lot of them look the same. But there's a whole host of other things you can do. We also have had 2 team members that were colourblind, so take that into account. Apparently 10% of males have some level of colour blindness, so I would always write stuff as well as colour code things. So now I know we're running out of time, so I'm quickly going to talk about charts and then retrospectives, and that's kind of it. This is a pack that I've created, and I'll circulate to anyone that wants it. My cumulative flow diagram, most of you that are familiar will say you keep changing your scope, Reg, pretty much you can work out what my iterations are. We didn't have heaps of business involvement to define our scope up in kind of a big block. But normally this red section should just be a straight line. So don't criticise my cumulative flow, it's more that we couldn't get the scoping done as one big exercise. We got it pretty much at the end of each sprint. But that's anyway, my cumulative flow. It just shows you what you want is a nice straight line, straight line, straight line, straight line for each of your processes. And this cumulative flow supports the Scrum task board. So you've got the same states, which is to do, in process, to verify and done. But you would have this with the same amount of states that you have in your workflow on the wall. Velocity, so for me, I love this because just at a glance I can see what we planned, what we delivered. Sprint 12, that was only a couple of days in from this example. One thing you think is, oh, this team's brilliant, they're actually delivering so much more than they said they would. To me, for a lot of these sprints, this team kind of sucks. And I'm the Scrum Master, so my estimation kind of sucks because with that big disparity, it just means really couldn't work out my planning very well. And if this was not a technical piece of work and we had a lot of BAs on the team, halfway through the sprint they'd be scrambling to feed the developers more work to hit that velocity. So, it's really, you want to get those lines as close as possible. That's what's important, not whether one's higher than the other. Here's a simple sprint burn chart. I know you see a lot of ones that have like long lines, but to me this is just something I can easily understand day by day, and the red trending. I've done both burn up and burn down because some people like up, some people like down, so I just simply mirror them to keep everyone happy. To me, I understand this chart, so that's why it's quite crude and simple. Not a lot of detail to it. I had a boss once and he said to me, I was talking about an enhanced burn down chart, and he said to me, Reg, you just had to explain that chart to me, it's failed. This is John Sullivan. So if you have to explain a chart to me, don't bother showing it to me. And here's the release burn up that just kind of shows at a sprint level what it is. But there's a whole bunch of other charts that you can do. And then this one, I've only just started doing this starting to do this with teams, so I don't want to put up my example until I've tested it. But this is just from one of the websites that I'll send you a link to. At a glance, it shows you the state of your features. And the thing I really like is it shows you whether it's in trouble being red, that little barometer at the bottom, how far along it is, how many features you've got, what percentage. So at a glance, it shows you a lot of information, and I think as a project manager, this is a really useful, simple tool. Retrospectives, I'll quickly do this, and then we'll quickly wind up, because I'm going to send everyone downstairs, and I'm a minute over. So just different, end of iteration. So Agile Academy Knowledge Hub is where I've got this from. To me, that's probably the best source for retro models. This is if you're doing a period of time, or you haven't done retros for a while. just different events over your timeline, and the little happy and smiley and sad face. We talked about that kind of motivation barometer. You get people to plot that, and you can do a trend line. Impact and frequency, this is if you've got some really big problems you want to address and highlight. And then this has become a very popular retro model, the starfish. Sometimes you don't have to have all 5 of these. You can have start doing, stop doing, and keep doing instead of the 5. And that's pretty much it for me. Are there any last questions? Because I know I've got to herd everybody down to the room downstairs. But what I'd like you to do is, by all means, send me your emails if you want me to just give you a pack and point you in the direction of some of these, because it'll just help you get up and running with this stuff a lot quicker than you having to do it ground up. But anyway, thanks for your time and attention, especially at the end of Friday.